Rain whispered against the window that morning in Portland, the kind of rain that blurs the city lights and slows every heartbeat. Inside a small apartment on Maple Street, Clara Bennett stood before her open closet, her mind spinning faster than the ticking clock on the wall. Every blouse was stained, every skirt wrinkled. Only one dress hung untouched, a deep wine-red one, short and soft, meant for a birthday party long ago, not for the serious gray halls of Ravenwood Consulting. She pressed the fabric to her chest, feeling its coolness against her skin, and whispered to herself, "Just for today." Some mornings, life corners us with choices that feel too small to matter, until they change everything. For Clara, that dress would become more than fabric and thread. It would become the moment she stopped hiding behind caution, the morning when the world saw her, really saw her, for the first time. But before that awakening came the stares, the whispers, the flush of embarrassment that burned deeper than any scarlet dress could show. Because sometimes, the path to dignity and understanding begins with a single, imperfect choice. And that morning, Clara was about to make hers. The rain didn't just fall that morning in Portland. It whispered, soft, steady, like someone thinking out loud. It tapped against the narrow kitchen window of a small apartment on the east side, where the smell of cheap coffee and lavender detergent mixed in the air. Clara Bennett sat at the edge of her unmade bed, her hair still damp from the shower, her mind already racing. The alarm had rung 30 minutes late, and her phone blinked with reminders, or Oz. Meeting, client presentation, don't be late. She took a slow breath, trying to quiet the rush inside her chest. Okay, jacket, skirt, heels. You've done this 1,000 times. She opened her closet and froze. Ink. Somehow. A pen must have burst during the night. Every blouse, every skirt, every safe little piece of armor she wore to work was dotted or streaked with black stains. The air smelled faintly of alcohol from the cleaning attempt she'd made last week. She pressed her palm to her forehead. No, no, no. Her eyes darted across the cramped space, the laundry basket still full, the iron unplugged, the stack of unopened mail leaning against the wall. It felt like everything in her life had been waiting for this exact morning to collapse. Then she saw it, hanging at the far end of the rack, untouched by ink or wrinkles the dress. Wine red, soft fabric that caught light even in the gray morning gloom. A little shorter than she remembered, a little bolder too. The dress she'd worn once, on her best friend's birthday, when she'd danced barefoot in the kitchen and laughed until she cried. Clara reached for it, fingers trembling slightly. She held it against her body, looked at her reflection in the mirror, cracked at one corner. For a second, she saw not the tired, overworked consultant she'd become, but a version of herself who still believed in beginnings. The clock ticked louder. 8:14. She hesitated. Ravenwood Consulting was a world of pressed suits and neutral tones, where even smiles were measured. Her boss, Ethan Ward, didn't tolerate mistakes or surprises, and a short red dress would be both. But there was no time. She let out a shaky laugh, half nerves, half surrender. "Guess it's you and me today." As she pulled the dress over her head, the cool fabric brushed her skin, waking something inside her. She brushed her hair back, slipped into her worn black flats heels, were a luxury she'd abandoned months ago, and stood still for a heartbeat. Outside, thunder rumbled low. Somewhere down the street, a car horn echoed. She grabbed her umbrella, her coffee, her courage, and stepped out. The rain greeted her instantly, cold but cleansing. The streets were slick, reflections of streetlights stretching like ribbons of gold and red across the asphalt. As she hurried toward the bus stop, her mind replayed fragments of her week, the client she couldn't please, the rent due tomorrow, the way Samantha from accounting had smiled when her idea got ignored in the last meeting. By the time the bus hissed to a stop, Clara's hands were shaking again, not from the cold, but from the weight of trying to keep everything together. She found a seat by the window, watching drops race each other down the glass. Across from her, A little girl in a yellow raincoat stared at her and whispered to her mother, "She looks like a movie star." Clara smiled faintly, whispering back to herself, "If only." The bus rattled through the city's heart. Gray buildings blurred by. When it finally reached downtown, she stepped off into a crowd of umbrellas, shoulders brushing, heels clicking. The glass facade of Ravenwood Consulting towered ahead, 12 stories of order and ambition. Clara felt the familiar knot tighten in her stomach. Every time she walked through those doors, she tried to become invisible, efficient, precise, forgettable. Today, that would be impossible. As she passed through the lobby, the receptionist's eyes widened slightly before offering a polite, too bright smile. 2 interns paused mid-conversation. The security guard, who usually nodded without looking, followed her with his eyes for a moment too long. She kept walking, head high, pretending not to notice. The elevator doors slid open with a chime. Inside, the mirrored walls caught her reflection from every angle. She saw the faint blush on her cheeks, the way her hair curled against the damp air. And for a fleeting moment, she wondered, was it really wrong to want to feel alive? Even just for one morning, when the elevator stopped at the 9th floor, the usual buzz of keyboards and phones filled the air. Conversations dimmed as she stepped out. The faint squeak of her flats echoed like footsteps on stage. Samantha's voice cut through the quiet. Sugar sweet. Well, someone's feeling brave today. A few chuckles followed. Clara kept walking, pretending her heart wasn't pounding in her ears. She reached her desk, set down her bag, and exhaled. The smell of rain clung to her dress, mingling with the scent of coffee and printer ink. She opened her laptop, trying to drown in spreadsheets, to act as if nothing was different. But everything was. Every glance, every whisper seemed louder than the storm outside. The red of her dress burned in the reflection of her screen, daring her to stay calm. Then came the sound, the distinct click of polished shoes approaching down the corridor. Slow, steady. The kind of sound that made people straighten their posture and check their screens. Ethan Ward, the CEO of Ravenwood. Tall, precise, always in control. He rarely ventured through the open floor unless something demanded his attention. Clara's pulse quickened. She kept her eyes on her monitor, but she could feel his presence draw closer, like gravity. A pause, and then, quietly but firmly, Miss Bennett. Her fingers froze above the keyboard. When she looked up, his expression was unreadable, somewhere between authority and something else she couldn't name. For a moment, the office seemed to hold its breath. He didn't raise his voice, didn't frown. He just said, in that deep, even tone that made everyone listen, "Could you step into my office for a moment?" Dozens of eyes turned their way. Clara's throat went dry. She stood, trying to appear composed, even as her knees trembled, as she followed him down the hallway. The sound of rain against the windows faded, replaced by the rhythmic tap of their footsteps on marble. The air felt colder there, heavier somehow. At the doorway, Ethan pushed the glass panel open for her. She stepped inside, the scent of cedar and ink filling her lungs, and for just a heartbeat before he spoke. Before anything happened, Clara had the strangest feeling that this wasn't the start of trouble. It was the start of change. The door closed behind her with a soft click. The air inside Ethan Ward's office always felt colder than the rest of the building, still, precise, like everything had been measured to the inch. Clara stood near the glass wall, droplets from her umbrella clinging to her sleeve. The city below stretched out in muted grays, the sound of rain softened by thick glass. She could hear her own heartbeat louder than anything else. Ethan moved behind his desk, his steps quiet, deliberate. He didn't speak right away. He placed a folder on the polished wood, adjusted the corner until it lined up perfectly with the edge. Only then did he look up. "That dress," he said finally, voice low but steady, "is not part of the company dress code." Clara swallowed hard. "I know, sir." "Then why wear it?" She hesitated, eyes falling to the floor. "Because I didn't have another option this morning." It sounded small, even to her own ears. But it was the truth. For a moment, Silence filled the room again. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far away. Ethan leaned back slightly, studying her, not just the dress, but the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept her hands clasped together to hide their tremor. "You're aware there's a client briefing in 15 minutes. Yes, sir. Do you think showing up like this projects professionalism?" The words cut, but there was no anger in his tone, just control, and something else beneath it, something unspoken. Clara nodded faintly, accepting the sting. "I understand. It won't happen again." Ethan exhaled, his eyes lingering a beat too long before he looked away. "See that it doesn't." She turned to leave, her cheeks burning, when he added quietly, "Clara." She froze. His voice had changed softer, almost uncertain. "I didn't mean to embarrass you." For a second, she wanted to turn back, to say something, anything, but words felt dangerous. So she simply nodded, opened the door, and stepped out into the hallway. The world beyond felt louder, now keyboards clattering, phones ringing, the hum of air conditioning, but beneath it all, she could sense the shift. People noticed. The whispers had begun. At her desk, she sank into her chair, the red fabric of her dress brushing against her skin like a reminder. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the gray carpet and forget the flush that still lingered on her face. But time didn't stop. She checked the clock 9 minutes until the meeting. The client presentation she'd spent a week preparing for. The one Ethan himself would lead. Clara opened her laptop, her fingers moving fast, almost frantic. Slides, notes, numbers. Keep your focus. Don't think about the stairs. But every time she caught her reflection in the dark screen, her throat tightened. The dress didn't look obscene. It was elegant, even simple. But here, in this building of rules and muted colors, it screamed still. She stood when the clock struck 9, gathered her folder, and walked toward the conference room. The meeting was already filling with voices, executives, assistants, a client in a tailored gray suit. Clara slipped into a seat near the end of the table, keeping her gaze down. Ethan entered moments later. His presence quieted the room instantly. He greeted the client, his tone measured and warm, then took his seat at the head of the table. His eyes passed briefly over the team, pausing, just barely, when they reached her. The presentation began. Charts glowed on the screen. Clara spoke when prompted, her voice steady, though her pulse raced beneath every word. By the halfway mark, she'd almost forgotten the dress. She'd lost herself in data, in the rhythm of explanation and response, until Samantha's voice sliced through the calm. "Clara, you might want to double-check that figure. It seems a bit off." It wasn't off. Clara knew it. She had checked it twice. But the tone, sweet, sharp, meant to draw eyes. Every gaze turned to her, including Ethan's. Clara met Samantha's smirk with the smallest smile she could manage. "Actually, it's correct. The variance reflects the client's revised projections from last quarter." Samantha blinked, caught off guard. Ethan's brow lifted slightly, a flicker of approval crossing his face. The client nodded. "She's right. We adjusted those numbers last week, and just like that, the tension broke. The meeting moved on. When it ended, Ethan closed his notebook and rose. "Good work, everyone. Clara, stay behind for a moment." The others filed out, murmuring softly. Samantha's heels clicked louder than usual as she passed, her perfume trailing behind like mock applause. Clara waited until the door shut, then silence again, the kind that hummed against the skin. Ethan leaned against the table, arms crossed. "You handled that well." She blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "Thank you, sir." He nodded, studying her for a long second. "You have potential. Clara, just don't let distractions take away from that." Distractions. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and quiet. Clara met his eyes, then really met them, and for the first time, she didn't just see authority there. She saw a man trying to hold his composure, fighting something he couldn't name. "I'll keep that in mind." she said softly. He gave a small nod, his gaze dropping to the floor before finding hers again. Good. When she left the room, her chest felt strangely lighter, though she couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the brief flicker of respect in his voice. Maybe it was knowing she hadn't completely crumbled under pressure. Outside, the rain had stopped, the windows shimmered with pale light, and the city smelled of clean pavement and second chances. Clara walked back to her desk, her reflection gliding alongside her in the glass wall, red, soft, out of place, yet somehow right. She sat down, exhaled slowly, and whispered to herself, just one day. But deep down, something had already begun to stir quiet as the end of a storm, something that would not end with this day at all. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. The scent of fresh coffee and printer ink drifted through the air, familiar but suddenly foreign. Clara stepped out, her heels tapping lightly against the polished floor, and for a fleeting second, it felt like the whole office had forgotten how to breathe. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Chairs creaked. A phone stopped ringing somewhere in the distance. Dozens of eyes lifted at once, curious, judging, and worst of all, amused. She didn't have to look up to know they were staring. She could feel it, like tiny pinpricks across her skin. The red of her dress caught the glow of the overhead lights, turning deeper, richer. She'd told herself that confidence was just posture and steady breathing, but her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She straightened her back and kept walking, step by step, slow and steady, as if she belonged there because she did. A whisper rose near the copy machine. "Is that Clara? Looks like someone's having a midlife crisis early." A chuckle followed, then another. She didn't flinch, not outwardly. But inside, something small curled up in defense. It wasn't just about the dress. It was about being seen for the wrong reasons, about the way people loved to label what they didn't understand. Samantha's voice floated across the room, smooth as silk and twice as sharp. "Well, would you look at that?" she said, leaning back in her chair. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Did I miss the memo about Casual Friday?" A few people laughed softly, nervously, the kind of laughter that wanted to stay out of trouble but couldn't resist the spectacle. Clara turned her head slightly, just enough to meet Samantha's gaze. Her voice came quiet, but even, "Guess you did." The laughter died almost immediately. The moment stretched thin, then broke. Clara moved on, leaving the echo of her own words behind her like a small shield. She reached her desk and exhaled quietly. The hum of computers returned. The tapping of keys resumed, but she could still feel the invisible spotlight burning on her back. She opened her laptop, pretending to focus on her inbox. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the dark screen, her hair a little loose, her cheeks warm, her eyes more alive than she remembered. There was fear there. Yes, but also something else, a flicker of defiance. For a long minute, she stayed perfectly still. The office noise faded into a blur. Her thoughts drifted back to that morning, the ink stains, the clock ticking, the moment she had whispered, "just for today." Maybe she hadn't realized what today would cost. Across the room, Samantha was still talking, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I just think professionalism matters," she said, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "You represent the company with how you look. Some people forget that." Someone murmured in agreement. Someone else just nodded, eyes down. It was easier that way. Clara's chest tightened. She could feel heat rising up her neck, that familiar mix of humiliation and anger. But she'd learned long ago that speaking up in moments like this only made you smaller in their eyes. So she smiled instead, a quiet, practiced smile, and let her silence speak louder than any defense. Still, her fingers trembled slightly as she typed. Minutes passed, then footsteps echoed behind her, firm, steady, unmistakable. Ethan Ward. The hum of conversation cut off again. Even without looking, Clara knew every gaze had shifted toward him. He passed between the rows of desks, his presence cutting through the tension like a line drawn in sand. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His calm was a kind of authority that made people straighten without realizing. When he walked past her desk, the air seemed to tighten, his scent clean. Faintly woody lingered a second too long. He didn't look at her directly, but she saw the flick of his eyes, quick, controlled, before he continued down the hall. Samantha's smirk faltered. No one said another word. When Ethan's office door clicked shut, the noise slowly returned, but the tone had changed quieter, heavier. Clara focused on the glow of her screen, her breath coming slow and steady, until she could almost convince herself that the world had righted itself again. Almost. At lunch, the break room felt smaller than usual. The smell of reheated pasta mingled with the buzz of gossip. Clara poured herself coffee, pretending not to hear her name tossed around like a rumor passed in whispers. "I heard Mr. Ward called her in first thing this morning. Maybe he finally noticed her. Or maybe he noticed the dress." The last voice laughed. Clara set down her cup gently, afraid her hand might shake. She didn't turn. She didn't respond. She just stood there, eyes on the swirling steam, and thought about how easy it was for people to talk when their own lives were safe and small. When she finally sat back at her desk, the light outside had softened, casting faint reflections across the floor. She typed another line, adjusted a graph, answered an email, worked the one place where she usually disappeared, but today, she couldn't vanish. Not with that dress, not with those eyes still watching. A notification popped on her screen meeting, rescheduled, Ethan Ward's initials at the end, a reminder that her day wasn't done. She took a sip of cold coffee, her fingers tracing the edge of the mug. For the first time since morning, she caught her reflection again, tired. Yes, but steadier now. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't being seen. It's staying upright while people decide what they think they see. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. A faint patch of light broke through the clouds, spilling across the glass walls of the office, catching the color of her dress just so, and for one quiet second, Clara thought maybe being seen wasn't the worst thing after all. But then Samantha's voice drifted over once more, sugar-coated and venomous. "Careful, Clara," she said, with a lazy smile. "The higher you stand out, the easier it is to fall." Clara looked up from her desk. Their eyes met. This time, she didn't smile. She just said, softly, "Then I'll learn how to land." And that was the moment, small, silent, unseen by most, when the balance in the room shifted. When the story truly began to turn, the elevator bell chimed, soft but distinct. A sound that usually went unnoticed except this time. The entire floor seemed to pause. The doors slid open, and Ethan Ward stepped out. His pace was steady, his expression unreadable, every detail of him perfectly controlled. Dark suit, crisp white shirt, tie aligned like a ruler had measured it. Even the rain from outside hadn't dared to touch him. He was the kind of man whose silence carried weight, whose presence drew attention without effort. People straightened when he walked by. Conversations fell quiet, screens were suddenly fascinating again. But as he passed through the center aisle, his gaze lifted and stopped. Clara. She was standing by the copy machine, holding a stack of reports. Her head slightly tilted as she waited for the paper tray to refill. The red dress caught the overhead light, soft against the sterile white of the office. She wasn't trying to stand out, but she did so vividly that the air seemed to change temperature. For a brief second, Ethan forgot to move. He wasn't a man easily surprised, but something about her in that moment pulled at the edges of his composure. The way she tried to appear invisible, yet radiated warmth against the gray hum of the office. The quiet defiance in the way she stood aware of the whispers, but refusing to shrink from them. Their eyes met. It wasn't long, barely a second, maybe less, but it felt suspended, stretched thin between curiosity and something deeper neither of them dared to name. Clara's heart skipped. The folder in her hands trembled slightly. She told herself it was just the air conditioning, just another morning. But that wasn't true, because when he looked at her, really looked. It was as if he saw something no one else bothered to notice, and she didn't know whether to feel exposed or understood. Ethan blinked once, and the mask slipped back into place, calm, detached. He gave a curt nod, one that might have been acknowledgement or dismissal, and continued toward his office. The glass door closed behind him with a quiet thud, sealing away whatever had just passed. Clara stood still, her pulse loud in her ears. Around her, the office began to move again, as if someone had pressed play after a moment of stillness. Samantha walked by, smirking. "Careful," she whispered. "Looks like you caught the wrong kind of attention." Clara forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Or maybe I just reminded him this place still has color. Samantha's smile faltered, only for a second. The rest of the morning blurred into tasks and timestamps. Clara worked harder than usual, typing faster, answering every email within seconds, anything to distract herself from the way his gaze lingered in her memory. Sharp, analytical, but not unkind, almost curious. At noon, she carried a stack of files to the conference room. As she passed by his office, she caught a glimpse through the glass wall. Ethan was standing near his desk, hands in his pockets, staring out at the rain-slicked skyline. For a moment, he wasn't the CEO, just a man deep in thought. Their eyes met again through the glass. This time, neither looked away. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or something older. Something that didn't belong in an office filled with fluorescent lights and deadlines. Clara turned quickly, pretending to check her watch. The files in her hands suddenly felt heavier. Later, when she sat down at her desk again, her inbox pinged. A message from the CEO's office. Short, formal. "See me at 3:00. Her breath caught. She reread it twice, half expecting she'd imagined it, but it was real. The hours crawled. The rain started again, faint at first, then steadier, brushing against the windows like fingertips. By the time the clock struck 3, her stomach was a knot. She stood outside his office, hesitating for just a heartbeat before knocking. "Come in." His voice was low, even. She stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of cedar and black coffee. He was seated behind his desk, reviewing a document, pen moving across paper with practiced precision. When he finally looked up, the same unreadable calm had returned, but his eyes still held that quiet depth that unsettled her. "Miss Bennett," he said, gesturing toward the chair opposite. "Sit down." She obeyed, hands folded neatly on her lap. "I wanted to discuss the presentation this morning," he began. "You handled yourself well, especially under unnecessary commentary." It took her a second to realize he meant Samantha's interruption. "Thank you, sir." He nodded once. "You've been with Ravenwood how long now?" 3 years, she said. "Almost 4. He leaned back slightly, studying her. "And yet, I realize we've never really talked." Clara hesitated, unsure if it was a statement or a test. "You're not exactly easy to approach," she said softly, a hint of humor beneath the nerves. To her surprise, the corner of his mouth lifted, just barely. "I've heard that before." The moment stretched, quiet but not uncomfortable. For a man known for his distance, his attention felt almost careful. "You're good at what you do," he said finally. "I notice things, even when I don't comment." Something in her chest tightened, a mix of pride and disbelief. "I appreciate that." Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "Good. Keep it that way." He looked back down at his papers, signaling the meeting was over. But as she stood to leave, he added, without looking up, "For what it's worth, that color suits you." Her breath caught. He didn't say the dress. He didn't need to. Clara turned toward the door, her pulse thudding in her throat. She managed a quiet, "Thank you," and stepped out before the moment could stretch into something dangerous. Back at her desk, the world felt different. The whispers still hummed, but they seemed far away now, muffled by the sound of her own heartbeat. For the rest of the afternoon, She worked in silence, the hum of the office fading into background noise. Yet, no matter how she tried, she couldn't shake the memory of that look, the way his eyes had softened for just a second, breaking through the shell everyone believed was unshakable. Outside, the rain eased into drizzle. Light crept back across the glass walls, catching faint reflections the dress, the space between them. She told herself it meant nothing, that it was just a moment, nothing more. But deep down, she knew better. Because once someone like Ethan Ward looks at you that way, nothing about your world stays the same. The office had settled into its late afternoon rhythm, phones humming, keyboards clattering, the steady drip of rain against the windows. Clara was typing a summary report when the sound of footsteps stopped beside her desk. She didn't have to look up. The air changed before he spoke, that quiet pull of authority everyone recognized. Ethan Ward. Miss Bennett. His voice was low, even, but it carried. Heads lifted, chairs creaked. Come to my office. A few pens froze mid-stroke. Someone coughed, pretending not to stare. Clara's fingers hovered over the keyboard, suddenly useless. She could feel Samantha's eyes on her, the faint curl of amusement that came whenever trouble found someone else first. Clara stood. The red fabric brushed her knees as she smoothed it, more for courage than for appearance. Yes, sir. Every step toward his door sounded louder than it should. The hallway felt impossibly long, lined with glass and reflections that followed her like ghosts. She could see herself in them too bright, too different, too easy to notice. When she reached his office, Ethan was already at the door, holding it open. A small gesture, polite, but it only made her heartbeat quicken. He nodded for her to enter. The door closed behind them with a quiet click that seemed to shut the rest of the world out. Inside, everything smelled of cedar polish and black coffee. The city stretched behind him through a wide pane of glass, raindrops crawling down its surface like slow tears. He motioned toward the chair across from his desk. Sit? She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap, trying to keep them still. The clock on the wall ticked softly, matching the rhythm of her pulse. Ethan didn't sit right away. He stood by the window for a moment, looking out, his reflection faint in the glass. When he finally turned, his gaze settled on her, not sharp, but weighted, deliberate. Do you know why I asked you in? Clara shook her head. Not exactly. He moved behind the desk, resting his hands on its edge. I wanted to discuss what happened this morning. The dress, the attention. Her throat tightened. If it caused a problem, I'm sorry. It wasn't intentional. I know it wasn't. His tone softened slightly, almost weary. But people notice things. And when they notice, they talk. I'm aware, she said quietly. He studied her face, the calm she tried to hold. You've been through whispers before, haven't you? The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, then nodded. Most of my career? Does it bother you? Yes. A pause. But not enough to stop showing up. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Something flickered in his eyes. Respect. Maybe. Or something more personal. That's not a common answer. Then maybe that's why people talk, she said, almost under her breath. For the first time, a small, genuine smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It faded quickly, but the echo of it stayed. You handled yourself well in the meeting earlier. You didn't let their comments shake you. I couldn't afford to, she replied. I like my job too much. Another silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. The rain outside softened, filling the quiet with a steady rhythm. Ethan tapped his pen once against the desk, then set it down. You've done good work for this company, Clara. You deserve to be recognized for that. But you also need to understand this environment feeds on perception. One misstep, even unintentional, can define you in ways you don't deserve. She looked at him, meeting his gaze fully. And what do you see, Mr. Ward? The question hung in the air like a dare. He didn't answer right away. His eyes searched hers, slow and measured. "I see someone who doesn't belong in the background," he said finally. Her breath caught. He straightened a paper on his desk, breaking the spell. "That will be all for now." Clara stood, her legs unsteady. She turned toward the door, then stopped when he spoke again. Quieter this time. "Clara." She faced him. "Don't let them make you small," he said, "even when it's easier." She didn't trust herself to answer. She only nodded once, then stepped out. The office beyond felt colder after that room flatter, somehow. People looked up as she passed, searching her face for clues, but she gave them none. Samantha's gaze followed her the longest, sharp and curious, like a cat waiting for movement. Clara sat down at her desk, her pulse still echoing in her ears. She opened her email, though she couldn't read a word on the screen. Her mind kept replaying the tone of his voice, not the words, but the way he'd said them, low and certain, like he meant them for her and her alone. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely. Light spilled through the clouds, faint and golden, brushing the glass walls with warmth. She watched it spread across her desk, catching on the edge of her keyboard, the rim of her coffee cup, the soft folds of her red dress. For the first time that day, she didn't try to hide it. She let the sunlight find her. And though the office returned to its rhythm, Clara knew something invisible had shifted. Not loud, not obvious, just a quiet change in the air, in the way her name might sound now when he said it. The day moved on, but she wasn't the same woman who'd walked into his office 10 minutes ago. Because sometimes, it only takes a few words spoken softly, behind a closed door, to start rewriting everything you thought you knew about yourself. The next morning came gray and heavy, clouds hanging low over Portland like an unfinished thought. The streets glistened with leftover rain, and the air carried that scent of wet pavement and coffee that only early hours could hold. Inside Ravenwood Consulting, the lights were already bright, too bright, erasing any softness the morning had promised. Clara sat at her desk, trying to focus on the report glowing on her screen, but she couldn't shake the echo of his words from yesterday. "Don't let them make you small." They had followed her home, into her shower, her bed, her dreams. She'd woken before dawn, heart still unsettled, wondering what had truly hidden behind that steady tone. She was still lost in thought when the phone on her desk buzzed softly. A message appeared on her monitor. "Mr. Ward would like to see you in his office." Her stomach tightened. Again. She smoothed her skirt, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the glass corridor. The tap of her heels was soft but insistent. Through the paneled walls, she could see him standing near his desk, arms crossed, his profile carved by the faint light of the overcast morning. He looked up as she entered. "Close the door, please." She did. The sound of it clicking shut felt final. Ethan gestured toward the chair. "Sit." Clara obeyed, though every instinct told her to stay standing. He didn't speak for a few seconds, just studied her, eyes moving from her face to the papers in his hand, then back again, like he was trying to choose his words carefully. Finally, he set the papers down and leaned forward. "I need to be honest. Clara, yesterday bothered me." Her breath caught. "I'm sorry. Not because of you." He cut in quickly, then hesitated. "Because of what it did to me." The words landed strangely, uncertain, unfinished. Ethan's tone shifted calm, measured, but with an undercurrent she hadn't heard before. "That dress," he said, glancing at her then away again. "It wasn't appropriate for the office. You know that?" "Yes," she said quietly. "I told you yesterday. It wasn't a choice." "I know." His hand tightened slightly around the pen on his desk. "And I told myself that should be the end of it." He paused. His voice dropped a note lower. But it wasn't. The silence stretched, long enough for her to hear her own pulse in her ears. Ethan looked at her, then really looked, and something unguarded flickered behind his calm expression. "I found myself thinking about you last night, about how you handled everything, the way you carried yourself, despite, he trailed off, exhaling sharply, despite the noise around you. Clara swallowed. She didn't move, afraid that even a breath might break the fragile space between them. He leaned back, shaking his head as if frustrated with himself. This is exactly why I keep distance from everyone. From people. His voice softened. It's easier to stay in control when no one gets under your skin. She watched him, unsure what to say. The man everyone called cold, distant, unshakable, here he was, letting a crack show. And somehow, that honesty was more disarming than any anger could have been. Ethan rubbed a hand across his forehead, his composure fraying just slightly. But you walked in yesterday, and for the first time in years, I didn't know what to do with myself. Her breath trembled. Mr. Ward. He looked up sharply, the edge in his tone returning, not directed at her, but at the situation itself. It's wrong, he said, almost to himself. I know it. You're my employee. I'm your superior. And yet, the last word lingered. Clara felt her chest tighten. She wanted to stand, to leave, to escape the pull of those words. But her body didn't move. You don't have to say this, she whispered. He gave a quiet, humorless laugh. I already did. Another pause, then softer. Almost breaking. You've been in my orbit for years. Clara. Reliable, quiet, capable. I thought I understood who you were. But yesterday. His eyes lifted to meet hers again. Yesterday. You reminded me you're not just part of this place. You're a person I can't ignore anymore. The confession hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. Clara looked down at her hands, clasped too tightly together. Her heart was pounding, her thoughts a storm. She should say something, anything to pull them back from this line they were about to cross. But when she spoke, her voice came out soft, unsure. I don't know what you expect me to do with that. I don't expect anything, he said quickly. I just needed to say it once, to admit it to myself. If nothing else, he stood then, moving toward the window, putting distance between them. The city outside was a blur of wet gray and faint gold. I've spent most of my life making decisions that left no room for mistakes. And now, he exhaled, eyes unfocused. Now, I'm standing here trying to control a feeling I never meant to have. Clara rose slowly, not out of defiance but instinct. She took a single step closer, enough to bridge the edge of the silence. You're not the only one trying to control something, she said softly. That made him turn. Their eyes met again, and for a second the room felt weightless, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then Ethan looked away, jaw tight. We should stop talking? Probably, she said, though neither moved. Outside, a low rumble of thunder rolled through the clouds, as if echoing something they both felt but couldn't name. The sound filled the room, broke the spell just enough for them to step back into themselves. Ethan straightened his tie, the small ritual of a man rebuilding his walls. We'll keep this professional. Whatever happens after, there doesn't have to be an after, Clara said gently. He nodded once, but his eyes betrayed him. There was still that flicker of something human, something warm beneath the layers of control. She turned toward the door, her hand on the handle, then stopped. For what it's worth, she said quietly. You don't have to fight it alone. He didn't answer, but she heard his breath catch, just once, before she walked out. Back at her desk, the hum of the office returned like static, ordinary and safe. Yet nothing about the world felt ordinary anymore. Her hands trembled slightly over the keyboard, the sound of the storm outside now matching the one inside her chest. And as the afternoon light dimmed, one truth settled between them, silent, undeniable, and far too late to take back. Neither of them would be able to pretend after this. The city outside had darkened early that day, the kind of gray dusk that made every reflection seem closer than it was. Inside Ravenwood, lights glowed across the glass walls, and the hum of computers echoed like distant rain. The office had thinned out. Only a few stayed late, the quiet workers, the careful ones. Clara was one of them. She sat at her desk long after most had gone, her screen dim, her thoughts louder than any sound around her. Every word from Ethan's office earlier still lived in her chest. It's wrong, but I can't ignore it. She'd tried to shut it out, to remind herself of the rules, the power difference, the danger of feeling anything at all. But denial was a fragile thing, and tonight, it was cracking. Her phone buzzed softly. A message. Come to my office before you leave. Just 7 words. But they carried the same weight as a confession. She hesitated. Every logical part of her screamed not to go. Yet she found herself standing, shutting her laptop, and walking down the long, empty corridor. The light in his office was dim, the blinds half drawn. Ethan was standing by the window again, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of water he hadn't touched. He turned when she entered, his expression unreadable but gentler than usual. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. She closed the door behind her. The faint hum of the building filled the silence between them. "You said you wanted to see me." He nodded, then hesitated, his gaze drifting past her before meeting her eyes again. "I've spent the day thinking about what I said yesterday," he began, "and I realized I wasn't fair to you. I put you in an impossible position." Clara took a small step closer. "You were honest." "Yes," he said softly. "But honesty isn't always kind." The words lingered, his jaw tensed, then relaxed again, as though he was still fighting something he didn't want to name. Clara's fingers curled around the strap of her bag. "If you regret what you said, I understand." "I don't," he answered too quickly. Then, quieter, "I wish I did." That admission landed between them like a storm breaking over still water. Clara felt her throat tighten. There was no going back now. The room felt smaller, filled with air that wasn't moving, and she knew if she didn't speak, she'd drown in all the words left unsaid. "Ethan," she began, her voice shaking slightly, the name strange on her tongue. He didn't stop her. He just waited. You weren't the only one who felt it. He froze. "What do you mean I mean?" She took a breath, her heart thudding. "I've felt it too. For a long time. I just didn't want to see it." The sound of rain started again, faint against the glass, as if to soften her confession. "I tried to ignore it," she said. "Tried to keep everything the way it's supposed to be. You're my boss. She laughed once, softly. "You're Ethan Ward. You don't make mistakes." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Apparently I do." The quiet laugh that followed didn't reach his eyes. They stood only a few feet apart now, the light behind him casting a pale glow across his shoulders. His face looked different, like this not the unshakable man everyone feared, but someone fighting his own heart. "Clara," he said, her name gentler than she'd ever heard it. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" she asked. "Because if you do—" He stopped, as if afraid to finish. "Then I don't know if I can stop myself from feeling it too." The words cracked something inside her. The wall they had both spent years building brick by careful brick began to crumble. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The only sound was the steady tap of rain, soft and relentless. "Finally," Clara whispered. "Maybe we've both been pretending too long." He closed his eyes briefly, like the truth hurt and healed at once. When he opened them, the look in his eyes wasn't cold anymore. It was raw, unguarded. "Do you have any idea how long I've been trying not to see you?" She shook her head. "Every meeting," he said. "Every time you spoke, I'd find myself listening to your voice longer than I should. Every time you walked into a room, it felt like someone had turned the lights back on." Her breath trembled. She didn't know what to do with words like that. "I told myself it was admiration," he went on, almost to himself, "that it was respect. But the truth is, it was never just that. It's you, Clara. It's always been you." She wanted to reply, but her voice failed her. She just stood there, her eyes glistening with all the emotions she'd kept hidden for months, maybe years. Ethan took one more step forward, close enough now that she could smell the faint trace of rain on his jacket, the warmth of his skin. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. The space between them pulsed with something electric, something terrifyingly human. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. She didn't. Instead, she said the only thing that felt true. "I don't want you to." That broke the silence completely. For a moment, neither of them remembered the titles, the rules, the hierarchy that separated them. There were only two people flawed, frightened, and suddenly seen. The air seemed to hum between them, fragile and alive. Ethan looked at her like a man who had finally found something he'd stopped believing existed. And Clara. She looked back like someone who had finally stopped running from herself. The rain outside grew steadier, washing the city clean, while inside that quiet room, two hearts finally spoke what their minds had tried to silence. They didn't touch, not yet. But the moment hung there, trembling at the edge of something irreversible. And when Clara finally turned toward the door, her hand lingered on the handle, her voice barely more than a breath. "Tomorrow will be different, won't it?" Ethan's answer came slow, quiet, certain. "It already is." The rain hadn't stopped when she left his office that night. It followed her like a shadow, soft, steady, unrelenting, the kind of rain that makes everything quieter, as if the world itself is listening. Clara walked down the long, dim hallway, her thoughts spinning faster than her footsteps. Every word he'd said replayed in her mind, every silence stretched wider. "It already is." That sentence lived in her chest. It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like the truth. The office had emptied hours ago, but lights still glowed behind a few doors. She paused near the elevator, her reflection faint on the silver doors, her face pale beneath the soft overhead light. She looked changed, as if something inside her had shifted, cracked open. A sound behind her. She turned. Ethan was there, standing in the corridor, hands in his pockets, his tie slightly loosened, his hair damp from where he'd run a hand through it. The hallway light framed him in a haze of gold and gray. He wasn't supposed to be there. Neither of them were supposed to still be here. Clara. Her name came out like an exhale, low and rough around the edges. She froze. "You should go home," she said, her voice too soft to sound convincing. "So should you." The space between them felt impossibly long and unbearably close at the same time. He took one slow step forward, then another. She didn't move, couldn't. "I keep telling myself to stop," he said, stopping a few feet away. "To keep this where it belongs." And her voice was barely more than a whisper. His eyes searched hers, tired and alive all at once. "It doesn't work." Something broke open inside her. All the restraint, all the careful pretending they'd been building toward this moment, whether either of them wanted it or not. The rain outside grew heavier, beating against the windows, a rhythm that filled the silence between them. He took another step closer. "Tell me to stop," he said again, softer this time, almost pleading, but she didn't. Instead, she said the truth, the one she'd been holding back for months. "I don't want you to." He closed the distance between them, not fast, not hungry, just sure, like a man walking into something he'd already accepted. When his hand touched her cheek, it was hesitant, almost reverent. His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face, tracing the faint tremor in her skin. She didn't look away. She couldn't. And then, the kiss. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't practiced. It was hesitant, fragile, almost clumsy. But it burned, not with fire, but with something quieter, deeper, the kind of warmth that reaches the places long left untouched. Her hands found his chest, not to push him away but to steady herself. His breath trembled against hers, and for a moment the world outside didn't exist. There was no office, no hierarchy, no line they couldn't cross. There were only two people who'd been trying too long not to feel. When he pulled back, it was barely an inch. His forehead rested against hers. Both of them were breathing unevenly, the space between their hearts filled with everything they couldn't say out loud. "This is wrong," he murmured. "I know. And yet I know," she said again, and her voice broke on the last word. He let out a quiet, unsteady laugh that wasn't really laughter. "You're making it impossible to do the right thing." Her lips curved, faint but real. Maybe the right thing stopped making sense a while ago. He leaned back, searching her face as though memorizing it, the line of her jaw, the softness in her eyes, the quiet courage she wore like armor. "You have no idea what you've done to me," he said, almost to himself. "I think I do," she replied. A silence followed, thick, alive, the kind of silence that says everything words can't. Outside, the city lights blurred behind the rain, streaks of amber and silver. The reflection of the two of them shimmered faintly on the glass wall, close enough to touch, yet fragile as light itself. He brushed his thumb against her chin, slow and deliberate, before letting his hand fall away. The absence of it felt louder than touch. "We can't go back," she whispered. "I know," he said, "and we can't stay here either." Neither moved. It was as if both of them understood that this moment would live somewhere between what they'd done and what they hadn't yet dared to do. Finally, Ethan stepped back, his expression torn between restraint and something dangerously close to longing. "Go home, Clara." She nodded, though her voice betrayed her. "Good night, Mr. Ward." His eyes softened. "Ethan," he corrected quietly. The sound of it, his name. Her voice hung in the air like a secret. She turned toward the elevator, her steps slow, the echo of his breath still on her skin. When the doors slid closed behind her, she leaned against the cool metal wall, eyes closed, trying to steady the rhythm of her heart. Down below, the rain was falling harder. Streetlights reflected in the puddles like scattered pieces of something once whole. Clara walked out into the night without an umbrella. The water soaked through her hair, her clothes, cooling the heat that still lingered under her skin. But she didn't mind. For the first time in a long time, she felt alive. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if she could face it, but she knew one thing with aching certainty. Whatever line they'd crossed tonight, neither of them would ever be able to pretend it hadn't happened. And as she disappeared into the misty Portland rain, Ethan stood at the window above, watching her go, hands buried in his pockets, jaw tight, eyes full of everything he'd never meant to feel. The storm outside raged on, and somewhere inside both of them, another had just begun. Morning crept in through the blinds, pale and quiet. The city still wore the scent of rain. Clara stood before her mirror, fastening the last button of her gray blazer. The reflection that looked back at her was steady, composed, almost ordinary, but she could still feel the ghost of last night on her lips, the warmth, the tremor, the moment when everything had changed. She told herself it was just a mistake, a passing storm, that she could bury it beneath routine, beneath rules, beneath a different kind of armor. But as she slid her badge over her lapel, the thought lingered like static in the air. When she arrived at Ravenwood, the elevator ride felt longer than usual. She stood among the morning crowd, everyone clutching their coffee cups, eyes glued to their phones, unaware that her world had tilted. The doors opened with a soft chime, and she stepped into the hum of the office, the same rows of desks, the same soft buzz of conversation, but she felt every eye like a weight on her skin. It didn't take long. The whispers started before she even reached her seat. She was called into his office again yesterday. At that hour, well, maybe she's finally found the shortcut to the top. The laughter that followed was low, sharp-edged. Clara kept walking. Her heels clicked evenly against the floor, her face calm, her breath slow. She'd learned long ago that silence could be its own kind of armor. Samantha was waiting near the break area, cup of coffee in hand, lips painted the color of smugness. "Morning, Clara," she said, drawing out the syllables. "You're early. Or did you just decide to stay overnight in the boss's office?" The words cut through the air, followed by a few quiet snickers. Clara stopped. She didn't turn immediately, she counted to 3 first. the way she always did when anger threatened to show. Then she looked at Samantha, her expression cool but not cruel. "If you spent half as much time working as you do imagining other people's lives," she said softly, "you might not need shortcuts either." A small silence fell, brief but thick. Samantha's smile faltered, her jaw tightening just a little. "Just making conversation," she muttered. "Then try kindness next time," Clara replied, and walked past her, at her desk. She opened her laptop and focused on the glow of the screen, but focus was impossible. Her mind kept flickering between numbers and memories, the way his eyes had looked in the half-light, the way his voice had softened when he'd said her name. Ethan Ward. The man who never lost control. The man who had kissed her like he'd been waiting years to forget how to... She closed her eyes for a moment, pressing her fingers against her temple. "You can't think about him here," she told herself. "Not now. Not where everyone can see you breathe wrong and make it a story." But even as she tried to bury it, she could feel him nearby, the faint echo of his voice from behind his closed office door, the steady rhythm of his footsteps when he moved. Every sound was too familiar now. By noon, the tension in the air had thickened. The usual chatter over lunch felt quieter, more charged. Samantha's voice carried again, louder this time, enough for everyone to hear. "You know, I just find it interesting how fast some people get private meetings with the boss. Must be her attention to detail." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel in volume, but in tone. It was the kind that pretends to be harmless. Clara didn't look up from her screen. She just took a slow sip of her coffee and said, "If you want his attention that badly, maybe start by earning it." A few heads turned. Someone stifled a laugh. Samantha flushed, the color rising high on her cheeks. Ethan's door opened then, cutting the air clean. He stepped out with a file in hand, his expression calm but unreadable. The room quieted instantly. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to pause. He looked around, scanning the space without obvious intention. But his gaze found Clara for just a fraction of a second. A glance so quick, so measured, that no one else would have noticed except her. Her chest tightened. The look wasn't warmth. It wasn't distance either. It was restraint. He turned to Samantha next, his voice level. "Miss Hall, the client memo I asked for yesterday, will it be ready by 1?" Samantha straightened in her seat. "Almost, sir." "Good," he said simply, and disappeared back into his office. It was nothing, an ordinary exchange, but the silence that followed said otherwise. Everyone went back to their screens, their whispers fading. For the rest of the afternoon, Clara worked without pause, fingers flying across the keyboard. Numbers, slides, emails, everything blurred together until it all felt mechanical, safe. That's what she wanted, to feel safe again. But safety, she realized, was gone the moment she'd let him touch her. When 5 o'clock came, she stayed behind as the others filed out. The office grew quiet, the glow of the setting sun spilling through the windows in streaks of amber. She gathered her papers slowly, her mind heavy with questions she couldn't ask. The door to his office opened softly. Still here, Ethan's voice was low. Careful. She looked up. He was standing by the doorway, his tie loosened, his eyes tired. There was no trace of last night in his tone, no flicker of what had passed between them. Only professionalism, steady and sharp. "Just finishing this report," she said. He nodded once. "You shouldn't stay too late. I know." A small silence followed. Neither moved. Neither looked directly at the other. He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, the faintest tremor in his hand. "I'll see you tomorrow. Miss Bennett." Her heart sank at the return of formality. "Of course. Mr. Ward." He lingered a second longer, as if he wanted to say something else, then turned and walked away. The sound of the door closing behind him was soft, but it stayed with her. Clara sat there for a while longer, staring at the fading light on her desk. She thought about how easily people created stories, how quickly a whisper became truth, and somewhere deep down, She realized she wasn't just afraid of what people might say. She was afraid of what her heart had already said and how impossible it would be to take it back. Outside. The evening settled over Portland, quiet and gray. The office lights flickered off one by one, leaving her in the soft glow of her monitor. She exhaled, slow and deep. Tomorrow would come again with its whispers, its stares, and that same impossible distance between them. But tonight, for just a moment, she allowed herself to remember the warmth of his touch. Then she folded that memory away, carefully, like a secret meant to survive the morning. The days that followed moved slowly, like a clock that had forgotten how to tick. The rain finally stopped, but the air inside Ravenwood felt heavier than ever. People talk softer now, but their eyes, those always carried noise. Clara could feel them on her back whenever she crossed the room. The way whispers stopped just half a second too late. The way laughter thinned when she walked past. She tried to tell herself it was her imagination, but it wasn't. Gossip had a way of moving faster than truth ever could. And truth, well, that was the part she couldn't explain to anyone, not even herself. Ethan kept his distance. At least, that's what it looked like. Meetings were professional, precise, timed to the minute. His tone carried the same authority as always steady, firm, impossible to misread, but every so often, in the middle of a discussion about numbers or contracts, he'd look up, just a glance, brief, controlled, and in that single glance, the room changed. It wasn't dramatic, it was quiet. But Clara felt it every time. The pause, the invisible pull that made her heartbeat skip, made the air between them stretch thin. She would look away quickly, forcing her voice to stay even, pretending she hadn't noticed, pretending she didn't feel that pulse of memory beneath the surface of her skin. By the third day, the unspoken tension between them had become its own rhythm, a slow, careful dance of distance and awareness. He would pass by her desk to drop off a document, his hand brushing the edge of her workspace just long enough for her to feel the nearness. Then he'd leave without a word. The office noticed, of course. Ravenwood was built on glass walls that reflected, voices that carried. There were no secrets here, only stories waiting for someone to repeat them. Samantha was the first to whisper. "You see the way he looks at her," she said to a coworker near the printer. "I told you something was going on." Her friend laughed softly. Maybe she's just better at playing his game. Clara heard them once, as she walked past with a file in her hand. She didn't stop, didn't turn, just kept walking, though her fingers tightened on the folder until the edges bent. That night, she stayed late again. The office was empty, the light above her desk humming faintly. She wanted the quiet, needed it. But the quiet only made space for thoughts she'd been trying to bury. She could still remember the feel of his hand, the weight of that silence before the kiss. It replayed without warning when she poured coffee, when she crossed the street, when she tried to sleep. It wasn't obsession, it was something deeper, something she didn't have words for yet. The door opened softly behind her. Still here, Ethan's voice was low, calm. She didn't turn immediately, just finishing up the client report. He stepped closer, the sound of his shoes against the floor barely there. "You shouldn't stay this late alone." "It's fine," she said. "It's quiet, too quiet." She smiled faintly, still looking at her screen. "I thought you liked quiet." He paused. "Not lately." That made her turn. He was standing near her desk, the light catching the edge of his face. There were dark circles beneath his eyes, tiredness that hadn't been there before. He looked human. That was the word that came to mind. Human in a way she'd never seen him. She wanted to say something, to bridge that tiny space between them, but all she could manage was, "You've been avoiding me." He didn't deny it. "I've been trying to protect us." From what he hesitated, then said quietly, "From everyone else, from ourselves." She studied him for a moment. "How's that working out?" A flicker of a smile crossed his lips, sad and real. "Not very well." Silence again, the kind that holds its breath. He finally spoke. You deserve better than rumors, better than people questioning your integrity because of me. Her voice softened. People will always talk. Ethan, it's what they do. Yes, but I'm the reason they're talking. She shook her head. You're not the reason. They are. The way she said it, calm, sure, without bitterness, made something in him break just a little. He looked at her like a man seeing something he couldn't unsee. You really don't understand how rare that is. Do you? What that kind of grace? Her breath caught, but before she could answer, he stepped back, the moment folding in on itself. Go home. Clara, he said softly, before we make things worse. She didn't move. They're already worse. He didn't reply, just turned toward his office, hands in his pockets. When the door closed behind him, she exhaled, long and slow. The next morning, things were different again, but not better. Word had spread farther. The glances were sharper now, the silences longer. One of the managers even pulled her aside, voice polite but firm, asking if she was comfortable with her current reporting structure. She smiled, thanked him, and said she was fine. But inside, something stung. By noon, Samantha had found a new way to cut deeper. Careful, Clara, she said as they crossed paths near the copy machine. The higher you climb, the thinner the air gets. Clara looked at her for a long moment, then simply said, Maybe that's why you're still breathing easy. A few nearby coworkers stifled quiet laughs. Samantha's eyes narrowed, but Clara didn't stay to watch the reaction. She just walked away. Calm on the outside, tired on the inside. The rest of the day moved in a blur. Ethan stayed behind closed doors, calling in other managers, speaking only when necessary, professional, unshakable. But when he walked out that evening, his gaze brushed hers again, brief, restrained, almost apologetic. And just like that, all her defenses crumbled again. That night, as she rode the elevator down alone, her reflection wavered in the metal walls. She thought of how fragile the line between strength and loneliness could be, how sometimes silence wasn't peace, it was survival. When she stepped out into the parking lot, the sky above was bruised with twilight. The wind carried the faint smell of rain again, distant but coming. She stood there for a while, watching the lights flicker in the office tower behind her, one window glowing brighter than the rest. She didn't know if he was still up there, but somehow, she knew he hadn't stopped thinking about her either. And as the first drops began to fall, Clara whispered to herself, barely audible, something has to give. Because it was true. Something always does. The office was quiet that night. The kind of quiet that only comes when everyone else has gone home, when computers hum to themselves, and the cleaning staff move like shadows down empty halls. Outside, the city glittered faintly through the glass, lights trembling in the wind. Clara was still there, her desk lamp the only glow in the long stretch of darkness. She wasn't working anymore. Not really. The spreadsheet on her screen had stopped making sense an hour ago. She just needed the noise of typing something to fill the ache of thinking. Then, from across the room, she heard the faint sound of a door opening, the click of polished shoes on the floor. She didn't have to look up to know who it was. Still here, Ethan's voice, low and steady, drifted across the open space. She straightened a little, forcing her tone to sound even, just finishing some numbers. He walked closer, stopping beside her desk. It's past 9, Clara. You should go home. I could say the same to you. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Touché. For a moment, there was nothing but the soft hum of the air conditioner. Then he said quietly, "Can we talk?" That made her look up. His expression was calm, but there was something restless underneath, something she recognized because it mirrored her own. "Of course," she said. He nodded toward his office. Inside, the walk there felt longer than usual. When the door closed behind them, the sound of it seemed to seal the world out, or maybe to lock the two of them in. Ethan moved to the window, staring out at the dark skyline. He didn't turn right away when he spoke. "I've been trying to figure out how to undo this." Clara's heart sank. Undo what? This, he said, finally facing her. Whatever it is between us. She stayed quiet, watching him. He ran a hand through his hair, the movement uncharacteristically unguarded. I've been in control my entire career. Every decision, every word, every damn step I've taken, it's all been calculated. But this, you... His voice trailed off, and he laughed softly, without humor. You make me forget who I'm supposed to be. Her breath caught. Maybe that's not a bad thing. He shook his head. It is when I'm responsible for you, for your future here, for your reputation. People will talk no matter what we do. Ethan, I don't care what they say about me. His tone sharpened for the first time, quick and rough, then softer. But I care what they say about you. She took a slow step closer. You can't protect me from everything. I can try. You shouldn't have to. He looked at her then. Really looked. And the control he'd been gripping so tightly began to slip. His voice lowered, threaded with something raw. I can't pretend anymore. Clara, I can't walk into this office every morning, see you sitting there, and act like nothing's changed. It changed the second I touched you. Her pulse stumbled. Then what are you saying I'm saying? He hesitated, as though weighing the risk of every syllable. I want to be honest about how I feel. I want to pursue this, whatever this is with you. But I also want to do it right. Clara's breath trembled. Right. He nodded. If this ever became public, it could ruin you. They'd call you names, question your work, reduce everything you've built to a rumor. I can't let that happen. I won't. So, what do you propose? She asked quietly. He sighed, the sound heavy, full of conflict, discretion. Until I can make the right changes here. Until no one can say your position depends on me. She didn't answer right away. She walked toward the edge of his desk, resting her fingertips lightly on the smooth wood. You mean a secret? Ethan's eyes softened. I mean, time. The word lingered between them, fragile but hopeful. She looked down at her hands. You really think time will fix this? I think time will make it clearer, he said. Whether it's worth the risk, whether we are... Her chest tightened. And what if it isn't? Then we'll know, he whispered. The honesty in his voice was almost unbearable. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. You realize this will make things harder, not easier. He gave a quiet smile. That's what happens when something matters. The air in the room shifted softer now, but heavier with feeling. Clara met his gaze again, and for a long while neither of them spoke. It wasn't silence, it was understanding. Finally, she said, all right, we do this carefully, professionally, no one knows, and if it ever starts to hurt more than it helps, we stop. He finished. She nodded. Deal. He looked relieved, though a trace of sadness crossed his face. I want to promise you something, he said. If this ever threatens your career, I'll walk away before it does. You'll never lose what you've worked for because of me. Clara smiled faintly, a kind of ache in it. You think you're the only one capable of walking away. His answering smile was small, knowing, no, but I hope you won't. That made her laugh softly, a sound too warm for the hour. You're impossible. I've been called worse. The tension broke just enough for them to breathe again. Outside, the lights of Portland shimmered against the glass. The world kept moving, oblivious to the two people standing in that quiet office. Drawing invisible lines they both knew they'd cross again. Ethan stepped closer, stopping just short of touching her. His voice softened. Clara, I don't know where this leads, but I know I don't want to go back to before. She looked up, her eyes reflecting the same fear and want he carried. Neither do I. And there it was again, that fragile, forbidden warmth that made everything else fade. He didn't reach for her this time. He just stood there, letting the air between them say what words couldn't. When she finally left the office, it was close to midnight. The city was quiet. Her heart wasn't. As she walked into the cool night, she realized the truth of it all. They weren't just trying to protect what they had. They were trying to protect who they were becoming because of it. And somewhere behind her, in that dimly lit office, Ethan Ward stood by the window, watching her go. His reflection barely visible against the glass, but his eyes filled with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: hope. The next few days unfolded quietly, almost too quietly, as if the world itself had agreed to keep their secret. The rain eased, the city dried, and Ravenwood returned to its ordinary rhythm: the hum of printers, the soft tap of keyboards, the murmur of voices blending into the kind of sound that hides everything and reveals nothing. But beneath that stillness, something had changed. Clara felt it in the way Ethan passed her in the hallway, his gaze steady but careful, never lingering long enough to draw attention, yet never indifferent. She felt it in the mornings, when she caught her own reflection before leaving for work, the faint flush on her cheeks when she thought of him. They had crossed a line and then built another one, thinner, invisible, made of promises instead of fear. It began with a conversation that felt more like a pact than a confession. It was late again, the city outside painted in quiet golds and silvers, and the two of them sat opposite each other in Ethan's office, no distance this time, no pretense. He spoke first, his tone soft but certain. "We can't undo what's happened, but we can decide how it continues." Clara nodded slowly, carefully. Yes, carefully. He leaned back, his hands clasped. "We stay professional here. No one finds out, not until it's right. And if it never is," she asked quietly, "then at least we'll know we tried the right way." The words held both reassurance and sadness. They spent the next hour setting boundaries that felt more like prayers. No lingering after meetings, no shared lunches, no late-night messages unless work demanded it. Every interaction at the office had to look effortless, ordinary, forgettable. But, of course, none of it was. They both knew that when he brushed past her to hand over a report, their hands might touch for just a second too long. Or that when their eyes met in a crowded meeting room, something unspoken would flicker between them, too real to hide. For Clara, that secrecy was both comfort and burden. It protected her from judgment, but it also made every heartbeat feel like a secret she wasn't sure she could keep. Yet she accepted it because she understood what it meant to protect something fragile before the world had a chance to name it wrong. In the weeks that followed, she learned to carry their closeness in quiet ways. She'd arrive early to the office some mornings, and there would be a small paper cup waiting on her desk, her coffee. Exactly the way she liked it. No note, no name, just warmth. Sometimes, late in the evening, she'd glance up and find him standing by the glass wall of his office, watching the city. Their eyes would meet through the reflection, and for a moment, the glass would feel like something thinner than air. It was enough, at least for a while. Or there were moments when the world felt normal again, when she laughed with coworkers, when she lost herself in her work. And then, there were moments that weren't normal at all. A company dinner where he sat 2 seats away, pretending not to notice the shade of her dress. A quarterly meeting when their hands brushed under the conference table, by accident or by instinct. She couldn't tell. She could feel Samantha's eyes sometimes sharp, searching, suspicious. There was no proof, only a scent of something off script. But Samantha had always known how to sense weakness. Late nights again. Clara, she'd say with that same half smile. Clara would only nod, unfazed. Deadlines don't care about the clock. Still, beneath her calm, she could feel the weight of pretending pressing heavier each day. Ethan wasn't immune to it either. He carried himself as if nothing had changed. But Clara noticed the small things, the brief pauses before he spoke to her in front of others. The way his hand would twitch slightly when he almost said her name in a tone too gentle for the room. One evening, as they both stood by the elevator after a long day, he leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you all right?" She nodded. "Just tired?" He looked at her for a moment longer, then said quietly, "We'll make this work. It wasn't a question, it was a promise. But even promises can tremble under the weight of silence. That night, when Clara got home, she sat by the window of her apartment, watching the rain return in soft streaks against the glass. She thought about what it meant to love someone in fragments and hidden moments, in glances stolen between walls. It wasn't the kind of love she'd imagined. It wasn't easy or simple or bright. It was cautious, quiet, built on discipline as much as desire. And yet, it was real. She realized then that love didn't always have to be loud to be true. Sometimes it lived in the stillness between breaths, in the restraint that kept it safe from breaking too soon. The next morning, she walked into Ravenwood early. The air was crisp, the office still asleep. On her desk was a single folded note, tucked beneath her keyboard. She opened it, only 3 words, written in his steady, slanted handwriting. "Still with you." Her hand lingered on the paper, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to smile without hesitation. The day unfolded like every other meetings, calls, reports, but something inside her felt lighter, because she knew that, behind every careful word, behind every ordinary gesture, there was a quiet truth running steady beneath it all, a truth they'd both chosen to protect. And as she looked up through the glass wall that separated her desk from his office, Ethan lifted his gaze from a document and met hers. Just for a heartbeat, it was nothing anyone else would notice, but for her, it was everything. A silent reminder of the promise they'd made to move carefully, to wait for the right time, to love with intention, not impulse. Clara turned back to her screen, her lips barely curved, her heartbeat steady again. For now, this was enough. But deep down, she knew careful hearts can only stay quiet for so long. 3 weeks passed like a slow heartbeat, steady, deliberate, full of small, secret moments that only 2 people in the world knew about. Outside the office, Clara and Ethan existed in a quieter universe, one built from hushed laughter, fleeting touches, and conversations that stretched long into the night. Inside Ravenwood, they were strangers again, polite, controlled, distant. It was a strange kind of love, one that had to hide behind measured glances and restrained gestures. On Friday evenings, they'd meet at a small cafe tucked behind a bookstore near the waterfront, where no one from the company ever went. She'd always arrive first, her hair still damp from the drizzle, her coat smelling faintly of rain and coffee. He'd come a few minutes later, his expression softening the instant he saw her. There. They were just 2 people, no titles, no walls. He'd listen as she talked about her work, her family back in Oregon, her plans to visit the coast one weekend. She'd tease him about how he ordered the same thing every time: black coffee, no sugar, no change. "You're a creature of habit," she'd say. He'd smile and answer, "You're my exception." Those moments felt safe, real. But safety was a fragile thing. Back at the office, the tension grew thicker each day. The whispers hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd become sharper, hungrier. Ravenwood was the kind of place where people didn't need proof to believe a rumor, they just needed silence. And Clara's silence had become their favorite evidence. Samantha, especially, seemed to take pleasure in watching. Her voice was honeyed but sharp, her eyes quick to follow every move Clara made. "You've been busy lately," she said one morning by the coffee machine, her tone light but pointed. "Late nights again." "The boss must really value your dedication." Clara smiled, steady and polite. "He values good work. You should try it sometime." It earned a few chuckles from nearby desks, but the satisfaction was fleeting. She could feel the unease underneath it, all the kind that comes from living 2 lives and not knowing which one might crumble first. Ethan noticed it too. In meetings, his gaze would flick toward her, subtle but full of concern. Once, during a particularly tense discussion, their eyes met for just a second, and she saw something unguarded there: worry, maybe even guilt. He broke the look almost instantly, redirecting the conversation to the next topic. Later that night, her phone buzzed with a single message: "You did well today. I'm proud of you." She stared at the screen for a long time before typing back, pride is dangerous. Ethan, he replied after a pause, so is silence. That night, she dreamed of being seen not by the world, but by him, fully and without fear. But morning came, as it always did, and the illusion broke with the sound of her alarm. The day began again with gray skies, coffee, and caution. By the end of the second week, the pressure had started to show. Clara caught herself flinching whenever someone said her name too loudly. She moved through the office like someone walking on glass, careful where she stepped, careful who she trusted. Still, there were moments she couldn't control, like the time she dropped a folder near the conference room, and Ethan bent down to help her gather the scattered papers. Their fingers brushed. It was nothing. But in that brief touch, she felt everything: the pulse, the warmth, the weight of wanting to hold on and having to let go. Samantha saw it. Clara knew she did. Later, Samantha stopped by her desk, her smile too sweet to be kind. Careful. Clara. The walls here have eyes. Clara didn't look up. Then they must be bored. I'm just doing my job. Samantha tilted her head. Are you? That night, Clara walked home through light rain, her hands deep in her coat pockets. The streets shimmered under streetlights, the world quiet except for the sound of her own thoughts. She felt the ache of exhaustion settle deep in her chest, not from work, but from pretending so much of herself didn't exist. She wanted to call Ethan, to hear his voice, to remind herself why this was worth it, but she didn't. Instead, she went home, poured herself a glass of wine, and sat by the window, watching the reflection of the city flicker against the glass. The next day was Saturday. They met at the cafe again, both pretending they hadn't been counting the hours. He reached for her hand as soon as they sat down. You look tired, he said softly. I am. He studied her face for a moment, then said, They're getting to you. She didn't deny it. I thought I could ignore it. But sometimes, I feel like every breath I take in that office is being measured. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm sorry. I never wanted that for you. She looked at him, her eyes steady. You didn't cause it. Ethan? The world did. He was quiet for a long moment. I just hate that I can't protect you. You can't protect me from what people choose to believe. He exhaled, a sound that carried both frustration and affection. Then I'll protect what's real instead. She smiled faintly. And what's that? You, he said simply. The way he said it, unflinching, honest, made her heart ache and heal at once. They stayed there for hours, talking about everything but the thing that mattered most, how long they could live this way, how long love could survive in shadows. When she finally got up to leave, he stood too. 3 weeks, he said softly, as if marking time itself. It feels longer, or shorter, she replied. Depends which part of it you're counting. He smiled, that small, weary smile she'd come to know. Then let's count the right parts. As she stepped out into the street, the air smelled faintly of spring. For the first time in days, the rain had stopped, the clouds were breaking, a narrow stripe of sunlight stretching across the skyline. Clara stood there for a moment, letting the light touch her face. She knew the whispers hadn't ended. She knew Samantha's eyes would still follow her come Monday morning. But right now, for this one quiet moment between storms, she let herself breathe. Because even secrets, she thought, can have their seasons of peace. The night shimmered with polished glass, soft laughter, and the faint chime of crystal. The rosewood ballroom glowed gold, every corner flickering with candlelight reflected from chandeliers that seemed to breathe above the crowd. A string quartet played something slow and elegant music that wrapped itself around people's voices like silk. Clara stood near the edge of the dance floor, her fingers grazing the rim of a champagne flute. The satin of her navy gown caught the light with each breath she took. It was beautiful, but understated, just like her. Around her, Ravenwood's finest mingled executives, partners, investors, all dressed in their evening best, all pretending the night was about charity, not politics. Ethan was across the room. She could feel his presence before she saw him, an invisible pull that made the air shift. He stood beside the board members, composed as always, his tux perfectly cut, his expression unreadable. Only when his eyes found hers did something change. A pause, a flicker of something human breaking through the calm. Clara looked away before anyone noticed. She'd promised herself she'd be careful tonight. They both had. But fate, she thought, has a strange sense of timing. The evening moved slowly, with polite smiles and practiced words. Clara found herself dancing with a client, Mr. Hamilton, a partner from Chicago. He was kind enough, older, his movements careful. The dance was harmless, expected, necessary. Yet as they moved beneath the light, she could feel a different kind of gaze on her, one that burned, one that followed. Across the room, Ethan stood very still, his jaw set. He told himself it was nothing, that it was business, that she was doing her job. But reason rarely wins against the heart when jealousy takes its first breath. He tried to look away, failed, the way Hamilton's hand rested a little too long on her waist, the way Clara smiled polite, restrained, but still his smile. Something inside him cracked open, quiet but deep. The music shifted, a new song began, softer, slower. Couples changed partners, the floor glimmered with motion. And before Clara realized what was happening, Ethan was crossing the room. He didn't walk quickly. He didn't make a scene. But the air seemed to move with him, the kind of hush that follows a storm before it breaks. People turned, sensing something they couldn't name. Clara froze when she saw him approach. Her pulse stumbled. "Ethan!" she whispered as he stopped in front of her. "Mr." Hamilton blinked, confused but polite. "Mr. Ward." Ethan's tone was even, but his eyes never left hers. "May I?" Hamilton hesitated, then nodded with a gracious smile. "Of course." The older man stepped aside, and just like that, Clara was standing inches away from Ethan in the middle of a crowded ballroom, every gaze beginning to drift their way. "Ethan," she murmured again, barely moving her lips. "What are you doing? Something I should have done a long time ago," he said quietly. His hand found hers, warm, steady. The music swelled. They began to move. For a moment, the world blurred, the soft rhythm, the light catching in her hair, the steady pressure of his hand at her back. Everything felt both forbidden and inevitable. Around them, whispers rippled like wind across glass. Names were murmured, questions born. Clara could hear her heart in her ears, louder than the music. "You shouldn't," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but I can't keep pretending." His tone was quiet, but there was no hesitation in it, no apology, only truth. The song slowed. He looked at her, really looked at the woman who'd changed everything he thought he knew about restraint, about risk, about what mattered. And then, in a single motion, he pulled her closer. The moment stretched, the music fading to something distant. His breath brushed against her cheek, his voice a whisper meant for her alone. No more hiding. "Clara," before she could speak, before the thought could even form, he kissed her. It wasn't reckless or loud. It was deliberate, deep, a confession without words. The room stopped. The music faltered, caught mid-note. For a heartbeat, the entire ballroom held its breath. Gasps. The soft sound of glasses clinking, of whispers swelling like a rising tide. Samantha's voice, sharp with disbelief, cutting through the silence somewhere behind them. Clara's hands trembled against his chest. She could feel every eye on them, every mind already spinning its story. But, in that instant, none of it mattered. The fear, the judgment, the noise, it all melted into something quieter, purer. When he finally pulled away, the look in his eyes was calm, unshaken. He took her hand, turned toward the crowd, and spoke with the same voice he used to lead boardrooms and silence arguments. Clara Bennett, he said, his tone even but resolute, is not just one of the most talented people in this company. She is someone I respect, someone I care for deeply, and I will no longer let her face the consequences of my silence. The words settled into the room like a bell's echo. Clara stood beside him, heart racing, eyes wide. She didn't know whether to breathe or run. Samantha's smile twisted into something thin and poisonous. Others exchanged looks: shock, judgment, fascination. Cameras clicked. The moment had already begun to spread beyond the walls. Ethan's grip on her hand tightened just slightly, a silent reassurance. Whatever comes, he murmured under his breath, we face it together. She looked up at him, and for the first time since that morning, months ago, when she'd stood in her small Portland apartment, choosing a red dress out of desperation, she felt the strange calm that comes after a storm finally breaks. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring: rumors, consequences, perhaps even loss. But in that instant, standing under the golden light, surrounded by the hum of disbelief and awe, Clara realized something she hadn't dared to before. Love, when true, demands truth. And sometimes, truth demands to be seen. The music resumed softly, unsure, fragile. Ethan lifted her hand once more, his thumb brushing the back of her fingers. She met his gaze, steady now. For a moment, the noise faded again, and they simply stood there, two people, no longer hiding, bathed in a light that felt both terrifying and right. When the night finally exhaled around them, Clara took a deep breath and whispered, "So, this is what freedom feels like." Ethan smiled, a quiet, weary smile. "Freedom," he said, "and everything that comes with it." And as the lights of the Rosewood Ballroom shimmered around them, she knew the world would never look at them the same again. But perhaps, for the first time, they could finally look at each other without looking away. The applause that should have followed their dance never came. Instead, a heavy, uneasy murmur rolled through the ballroom like thunder before a storm. Faces turned, phones lifted, whispers turned sharp. Clara could feel the heat of every gaze pressing into her skin, the noise swelling until it became a wall around her. Ethan's hand was still in hers, but it felt heavier now, more burden than the comfort. The light seemed too bright, the air too thin. Somewhere in the crowd, Samantha's voice cut through like glass. "So, that's how you got the promotion?" "Clara." The words hung there, slick and cruel, and for a moment the room went completely silent. Ethan turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "That's enough, Samantha." But she didn't stop. "Is it? Or are we supposed to pretend this isn't what it looks like? The CEO and his favorite employee. How inspiring." A few nervous laughs rippled through the guests, soft, uneasy, the kind that hide behind someone else's courage. Clara didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her silence, her stillness, said everything: the pain, the humiliation, the fight to hold her dignity when the world wanted to take it. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Clara's earned every bit of respect in this company," he said, his voice calm but dangerous. "And you would do well to remember what professionalism looks like." But Samantha only tilted her head, that smug half-smile still on her lips. "Professionalism. Seems to me that word doesn't mean much around here anymore." And with that, she turned and walked away, the sound of her heels echoing like a judgment. The night didn't last much longer. The music returned, but the warmth never did. People smiled politely as Clara and Ethan left the ballroom, but the looks they exchanged behind those smiles told the truth. Every whisper had already taken root. By morning, the photos were everywhere. The kiss, the look, the story, Ravenwood's scandal. It spread faster than reason, feeding on gossip blogs and internal messages. Clara arrived at the office early, her chest tight. She could feel the shift the moment she walked through the glass doors. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Eyes flicked up, then down again. She kept her head high, She always did, by noon. Ethan called an emergency meeting with the senior staff. Clara didn't attend. He'd told her not to. She waited at her desk, her hands resting on the keyboard, though her mind wasn't really there. Every passing minute stretched longer than the last. And then the chaos came. It started as a flicker on her screen, a warning window flashing red. Then another, then 3 more. Lines of code began to shift, numbers rearranging themselves in patterns that didn't make sense. Clara leaned in, her heart thudding. She knew this wasn't an error. Someone was inside the system. She opened the security panel, typing commands faster than she could think. The server logs were filling with unauthorized entries, dozens of them, bouncing from foreign IPs. Within seconds, entire data sets began to vanish. It wasn't a rumor now, it was an attack. Clara grabbed her phone. "It's not responding," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "We're being hacked financial database access. Live. Within minutes." Ethan was there, flanked by a handful of panicked executives. Screens around the office flashed the same alerts, the sound of alarms cutting through the air. "Can we shut it down?" one of them asked. Clara was already typing. "If we shut it down, we lose control. Let me trace the entry first." "Do you even know what you're doing?" Samantha's voice rose from the back. "This isn't your job anymore." Clara didn't look up. Her fingers kept moving, the glow of the monitor washing her face pale. "You're right," she said quietly. "It's not my job, but it's my company too." Lines of code scrolled faster. She traced the breach to a hidden back door in one of the update patches, something that had been sitting dormant for months, waiting for a trigger. Whoever had planned it knew Ravenwood's system inside out. She muttered to herself, "You're clever." Then, louder. "They're siphoning data through a mirrored gateway in Singapore. I can reroute the connection, but I'll need admin clearance." Ethan stepped closer. "You have it." Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, a silent trust, unspoken but absolute. Clara's hands flew, windows opened and closed. The air felt electric, alive with tension. People stood behind her in stunned silence as she worked, her voice calm and low, explaining what she was doing only to herself. Then suddenly, a sound, the sharp ping of success. The system blinked once, twice, then stabilized. The red warnings faded, replaced by the soft blue of restored access. Clara leaned back, exhaling slowly. "They're out," she said, "and I've locked the entry point. Data loss less than 1%. A long silence followed, broken only by the hum of the computers. Then, a few hesitant claps. Then more. Within seconds, the room erupted in applause, real this time, not polite. Ethan didn't say anything at first. He just watched her, his expression softening into something that looked almost like pride. Then, in a low voice meant only for her, he said, "You just saved us." Clara shook her head gently. "I just did what needed to be done," but she knew better. Word spread quickly, not about the scandal now, but about the woman who'd stopped a breach that could have cost millions. The narrative shifted, almost reluctantly, but it did. By evening, the same people who'd whispered behind her back now spoke her name with awe. Even Samantha had gone quiet. As Clara packed her things to leave that night, the office felt different. Not soft or still wary, still watching, but quieter in a way that suggested respect. Hard-earned, maybe even reluctant, but real. She stepped outside into the cool air. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe again. Her phone buzzed with a message. "Dinner?" She smiled, the tension easing from her shoulders. "Only if it's quiet," she replied. "Always," came the answer. Clara slipped her phone into her bag, her steps light against the pavement. The storm hadn't passed completely, but she'd found her footing inside it, because sometimes the world tries to define you by your mistakes, and sometimes you rewrite that story line by line, code by code, until it becomes your own again. And somewhere high above the skyline, in a corner office still glowing with light, Ethan Ward stood by the window, watching the rain start again. He didn't feel the weight of scandal anymore, only gratitude, because now he knew there were storms that could ruin you, and storms that could reveal who you truly were. The following Monday morning, Ravenwood felt different. The walls that once hummed with whispers now held a kind of cautious quiet, the kind that comes after a long storm finally breaks. News traveled fast, as it always did, but this time, it wasn't scandal that filled the air. It was clarity. Ethan Ward had made it official. In a company-wide memo, written with the precision and honesty that marked every decision he made, he announced two things: Clara Bennett would now report directly to the Vice President of Operations, and their personal relationship, registered under company policy, would be handled with full transparency. There were no grand speeches, no defensive words, just truth, delivered plainly. Some called it bold, others called it foolish, but for Clara, it felt like peace. When she walked into the office that morning, she could feel the weight that had once pressed on her shoulders ease a little. There were still glances, of course curious, lingering but no longer cruel. The tension that had followed her every step was slowly dissolving into something quieter, something almost like respect. Samantha passed her in the hallway and, for the first time in months, didn't say a word. No smile, no sneer, just silence. Clara took that as progress. Work resumed. Projects returned to focus. The company's data breach became yesterday's headline, replaced by gratitude for the woman who had saved millions. And life, ordinary, steady, beautiful in its routine, came back. But something inside Clara had shifted. That evening, she stayed a little later than usual, tying up loose ends. When she finally left, the sun had already slipped below the Portland skyline, leaving the sky brushed in shades of violet and silver. The city was quiet, softened by distance and dusk. She drove home with the windows down, letting the cool air fill her lungs. When she reached her apartment, she stepped onto the balcony, the same one where she had stood so many mornings before, coffee in hand, wondering how to survive another day at work. Tonight, the world looked different. The light stretched endlessly below her tiny windows, glowing in the dark, lives unfolding in thousands of silent stories. Somewhere out there, people were arguing, laughing, loving, forgiving, and she realized how much she'd changed since the day she'd stood here, panicked over a closet full of ruined clothes, clutching a single red dress like a mistake waiting to happen. She smiled at the memory now. That dress, too short, too bold, too wrong, had set everything in motion. It had made her visible in a world that too often looked past her. It had led her into chaos, yes, but also into truth. Behind her, the sliding door opened with a soft click. Ethan stepped out, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. The weight of the day softened in his eyes. "You're quiet," he said gently. She nodded, her voice low. "Just thinking." About what? She turned slightly, the city's glow tracing her profile. About how everything started, about that red dress. "I thought it was a disaster." He smiled faintly. Maybe it was. The right kind. Clara laughed softly, the sound blending with the hum of distant traffic. "Funny, isn't it? One bad morning, one impossible choice, and somehow, it leads here." He moved closer, resting his hands lightly on the balcony rail beside hers. Life doesn't always unfold neatly. Sometimes it trips us, just to remind us we're still moving. They stood in silence for a moment, the breeze brushing between them, down below. The city lights flickered like tiny heartbeats, steady and alive. Clara leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. Ethan's voice was soft. Not once. She thought about it, the rumors, the sleepless nights, the sting of being misunderstood. Then she looked out at the horizon, where the last traces of daylight still lingered. "No," she said finally, "because everything that hurt taught me something worth keeping." He nodded, his arm finding its way around her. "Then I'd say we made it." She smiled at that, not a wide, triumphant smile, but a small, knowing one. the kind that comes when the heart finally stops fighting itself. They stood there for a long time, saying nothing more. The air was cool, the kind that carried the scent of rain long before it fell. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed, its low hum echoing through the night. Clara closed her eyes and breathed. This, she realized, was what healing sounded like, not applause, not victory, but quiet, the kind of quiet that follows truth. When she opened her eyes again, her gaze drifted to the corner of the living room, where that red dress hung neatly on its hanger. She hadn't worn it since that morning. For a moment, she considered putting it away, folding it out of sight, but instead, she smiled, because it wasn't a symbol of shame anymore. It was a beginning. The rain started then soft, steady drops against the railing. Ethan reached out, letting a few fall into his palm. Clara did the same, watching the tiny ripples scatter and vanish. The city below shimmered brighter beneath the rain, as if every light had decided to forgive the night. And in that small, sacred silence between thunder and breath, Clara understood something she couldn't quite put into words, that sometimes the moments that break us are the same ones that rebuild us quietly, completely, beautifully. She took one last look at the city, then leaned into Ethan's side. "You know," she whispered, "I used to think that dress was the worst thing that ever happened to me." He turned to her, his eyes soft. "And now," she smiled, her voice barely a breath, "now, I think it was just life's way of getting my attention." He laughed quietly, pressing a kiss to her temple. And for a while, they simply stood there, no audience, no whispers, no weight, just two people, wrapped in the kind of peace that only comes when everything finally makes sense. Above them, the rain fell gently. Below, the city glowed. And in between, Clara Bennett smiled into the night, because somewhere between the chaos and the calm, she had found herself again. Sometimes, life's most unexpected moments, the ones that seem like mistakes or embarrassments, turn out to be turning points. Clara's red dress began as an accident, a day of panic and misunderstanding. Yet through it, she discovered courage, honesty, and her own quiet strength. Her story reminds us that dignity is not something others give us. It's something we protect within ourselves. Even when the world judges harshly, we all face moments when we're misunderstood, when our intentions are questioned, or when the world seems eager to define us by one moment instead of an entire life. But, like Clara, we can choose grace over anger, integrity over fear. Time has a way of revealing truth, of softening cruelty and rewarding patience. In the end, the storms that shake us are often the same ones that reveal who we truly are. And sometimes, what feels like the end of everything is simply life's way of inviting us to begin again with clearer eyes, steadier hearts, and a little more faith in ourselves. Thank you, dear friends, for staying with this story until the very end. If Clara's journey touched your heart, reminded you of your own quiet strength, or simply made you pause and feel, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep creating stories that warm the soul, heal the heart, and remind us all that kindness still matters. Until the next story, take care of yourself and keep shining your light in this world.